Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, wherever you're joining in from today. Welcome to another episode at the Reactors. My name is Rav and I'm the Program Manager at Reactor London. Before we get into the session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. Again, we're all here to learn, so please be respectful, please be mindful. The chat will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. We're back with episode 5 of Azure Fundamentals, which is called the 10 Tuesdays to AZ900. Today, we'll be talking about Azure Storage as a core Azure service. And this, obviously, session will be led by Johan. If you have missed the previous sessions, I will put a link into the chat for the YouTube playlist. So please go on and then you'll be able to find all the previous sessions in that playlist. And please try and be there for the whole session because Johan will talk about or will give you a little surprise during the middle of his presentation about something which will be useful for everyone. So please stay online throughout the presentation. And with that, I'm now going to pass it on to Johan. Hi, Johan.
Great. Hi, hello. Great stuff. I hope everyone can hear me again. I just want some sort of a confirmation that someone can hear me. Rav, you can hear me, I presume?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Perfect. And everyone can see my screen. I just want to confirm that as well.
Yes, we can see your screen and hear you as well.
Awesome sauce. Okay, great stuff. So good evening, good morning, wherever you are. These broadcasts do go out sort of globally. So you might be in a completely different time zone, but welcome to the 5th session or day 5 of our 10 days to Azure Fundamentals. Where we're essentially drilling down into the content that relates to the certification. If you're interested in the certification for Azure Fundamentals, you'll see we've got some links towards the bottom there. Essentially, the second link will link directly through to the Microsoft Learning Path on the learn.microsoft portal. So you are more than welcome to go after this session to go click through on some of these links and actually go and do some self-study. My name is Johan Meiberg, and I'm a Microsoft technical trainer with Microsoft here in the UK, originally from South Africa. You'll see my Twitter handle there. You will also see my LinkedIn profile if you're interested in connecting. I love connecting with my learners. So akka.ms/Johan. I'm quite passionate about community work and sharing knowledge with people and other folks. It's not my first rodeo at Microsoft. In a previous role, I was a cloud solution architect. I lived just outside of London, right next to the Epping Forest, where I tried as much as possible to get my mountain bike as dirty as I can. So enough about me. I always feel I'm spending too much time on that slide, but it is what it is, I guess. So day 5 or session number 5 is all about Azure Storage Services. Now, storage is a key part of your infrastructure as a service. We've already touched on what infrastructure as a service is actually. So storage is one of those key components that you can use for an array of different things, right? Part of what we were talking about is what are some of the benefits? We will touch a little bit on storage redundancy. I don't want to go into too much details there. It's probably not going to be part of the exam to that sort of level, but I will touch on the redundancy options and the replication. And then we will look at the different services that make up an Azure Storage account, right? Queues, tables, files, and blob storage, where we'll probably spend most of our time around blob storage. As I said, this is one of my favorite parts of the Azure environment, predominantly because with storage accounts, you can do so many things. And as you can see there, towards the bottom, we've got files that give you a file share type capability. We've got tables that give you a NoSQL type scenario. We've got queues for load leveling between different applications. And then we've got blob storage, which essentially is the ability for you to be storing static content, at a HTTP or HTTPS based location. So definitely one of my favorite topics. I'm going to do a brief overview of storage accounts, and then I will break into a demo where I'll demo creating one of these storage accounts. While that's busy provisioning, I'll come back here and we will touch on one or two additional slides, and then we'll go back into some more demo. I don't have a lot of slides today because I've got so many demos to actually give, right? So first of all, storage is one of our services that's been running the longest inside of Azure, right? So you'll notice that we're currently standing on version 2 of storage accounts, right? So we originally had blob storage. We had storage v1. Now we have a storage v2, and this really just alludes to the fact that our technology and the technology we're using behind the scenes keeps evolving and keep changing, right? So you can still provision some of these other storage account types, but preferably, if you want all the capability that I'm going to be talking about, you want to go for a storage v2 account. This is typically going to be, the latest sort of technology that we've implemented in our data center, right? So because technology keeps changing, things get faster, things get smaller. Over time, of course, Microsoft is going to roll our technology forward in our data centers, right? And to that end, we will keep moving all our services forward. Traditionally, what we will see in the portal, if we are moving away from something towards something new, is in the portal you will see in brackets the words classic behind the term, right? So if I create, for example, a network security group, you will currently see that there's network security group classic, the old type of network security group, and then there's network security group without the word classic behind it, which implies that is the newest edition of network security groups, just as an example. So we haven't added the word classic to any one of these, but you will see that we've got different storage account types. And this is something you cannot change afterwards, right? So I cannot change from if I create a blob storage account, or if I create a v1 account, or if I create a blob storage account or a file storage account. This is something I cannot change. So once you've created the storage account, and I'll tell you in a couple of minutes why it's called probably a storage account, right? Because it's important to understand that. Once you've created the storage account, you probably have to remove the storage account and recreate it again. And because the storage account has essentially got an HTTP-based endpoint, you'll find that the storage account name needs to be globally unique, because we will go and append the name to files.windows.net to a URL essentially, right? And that gives you your own endpoints. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So talking about these storage account types, you'll also see that we've got a bunch of supported services. I'm not going to cover them now, but suffice to say that we will cover all of these, in the up and coming sort of slides and in my up and coming demos. I'm going to touch on all of these. You'll also notice that we've got some supported tiers, and for supported tiers, we're essentially talking about the type of disk that we are using, right? Premium typically refers to a SSD type disk, a very fast type disk, whereas standard refers to, typically it might actually also be a SSD disk, but it, or magnetic disk or something like that, but it might typically be, give you a little bit lower performance than the premium option. And you will notice that based on the storage account type, we support different tiers, right? So if I've created a blob storage account, I will not be able to have premium storage on on that account. And then also we've got some replication options, and the replication options talk predominantly to the way we are essentially ensuring, in the case of a disaster, that your data is actually safe and accessible. So there's different replication options, and I'll touch on this in the following slide. But this refers to making additional and storing additional copies of your data in case the disk fails, in case the entire zone fails, in case the entire region fails. Your data is still available either in another region or in another data center or on another disk for that matter. So I will touch on all of these. So before I actually carry on, let's see if we can create, let's see if we can create a storage account quick. I've got, let me just bump my font here slightly. I apologize for that. I'm going to go for storage accounts here, and I should have one or two already. there you can see my never on storage account, because always on was already taken. I'm going to hit the create button. I'm not gonna go through all the details here. Just be aware of that. I'm gonna select my dev subscription, and in there I'm gonna create a new resource group. I'm gonna call this one 10T. And this is where I'm going to place it. My storage account name is also going to be 10T, right? 10T, I'm pretty sure it's going to be available. I cannot think anyone would have used that. I'm going to go for UK South, right, as the location. But if I scroll down a section, you will see there that I can choose between either the standard performance, right, or I can choose premium performance. And if I choose premium performance, I can go for any one of those account types if I wanted to. If I select standard, it's gonna create a general, general purpose V2 account, and that's essentially what I want right now. Now you'll notice that what I'm going to select here is I'm going to select geo redundant storage, but we've also got a whole host of different other options, right? So I've got locally redundant storage. I've got geo-redundant, zone-redundant, geo-zone-redundant, etc., etc. And you'll notice that I've also got to make read access to data available in event of a regional unavailability, right? But again, I've got some slides that'll cover that, so we will chat about that in a minute. I'm going to click on advanced here. It won't take too long to create the storage account, but there you can see I can require secure transfer for REST API operations so that it encrypts the data between the client that calls the service and the service itself, HTTPS basically. And then you'll notice that I've also got the option to enable public access on containers. Public access on containers is crucial if you're running something like a public-facing web application, like a website, and you've got some of your images, for example, in the storage account, so that I can access these images without having to authenticate, right? So anonymous access is really what that refers to. And then there's a couple of additional options here. I'm not gonna waffle through the rest. I'm just gonna click on data protection. You will notice here that, on networking, and you'll see here I can limit the access to my storage account, for example, to a Azure Virtual Network as an example. And I can also specify whether I want folks to be routing to this storage account via their internet connections or via the Microsoft backbone, right? So if I choose Microsoft network routing here, the end user will jump on the Microsoft network at the closest breakout point and then use our routing for that. Next, you'll notice that we've also got some recovery options like soft delete. I can specify how many days I want to retain items that were deleted as an example. I can also enable things like versioning for my blobs, and a couple of additional options. Just from an encryption perspective, because the information is always encrypted on disk, but you've got the option to bring your own keys to encrypt the data, right? So if you don't want Microsoft to manage the keys, MMK, Microsoft Managed Keys, you can use customer managed keys, right? And if I specify customer managed keys, you'll notice I can point it to a key vault, and I can be storing those keys in the key vault that is used to essentially encrypt the data. And then you'll notice that I can go and tag this resource if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that. Ooh, what is your problem? That is very interesting. I know exactly what is wrong here. I just need to select a different subscription, because I've limited that subscription to only provision in a certain location actually today in my course. so that was actually an Azure policy in action. I created a policy that specified that we can only provision resources in a certain region, for that dev subscription. So I chose another subscription and the deployment continued. So very much unplanned, very successful demo there, if you can read between the lines. So my storage account is actually created and we're good to go. Before I continue though demoing the storage account, I promised you that we will look at these replication options in a little bit more detail. So when I create a storage V2 account, I can choose from any one of these data replication options. I can choose, for example, locally redundant storage, which implies that my data will be replicated 3 times within a single facility, right, in a single region. Or I can choose zone redundant storage, which implies that the data will be replicated across 3 availability zones within a single region. These top 2 are essentially inside the same region, right? And then we've got geo-redundant storage, where we are replicating the data 3 times in the primary region, but then we are replicating the data 3 times to the regional pair, right? Now remember, we spoke about the regional pair probably about 2 Tuesdays ago. The regional pair is a region that is linked to a specific Azure region. So if I provision, for example, in South Africa North, my regional pair will be South Africa West. So if I choose geo-redundant storage and I place my storage account in South Africa North, it'll automatically start replicating the data to South Africa West, right? And if South Africa North is down for whatever reason, we will fail over to South Africa West, and my storage account will still be available in that at the same endpoint in that same in a different region. So my data is essentially asynchronously replicated between the region and the regional pair. So that geo-redundant storage, be mindful of this, because most of the time our regional pairs are in the same country. For 2 or 3 different regions, our regional pairs might be in another country, right? Where we might only have a single region within your country. Maybe that's the scenario with you. If you have something like data residency issues or requirements from a governance and compliance perspective, and the data needs to be stored inside your country, you would rather want to go for zone redundant storage there, or you would want to go for local redundant storage, right? So 3 copies of your data in the same facility, or 3 copies of your data across multiple facilities in the same region is still pretty sort of solid. And from locally redundant storage onwards, we are giving you from 11 nines, 12 nines, and up from there, essentially in terms of uptime. So we are still guaranteeing you, a huge amount of uptime here. It's not, it doesn't mean it's going to be down for a period of time. Very, very short time that we will guarantee that your data is up. And then we've also got read access geo-redundant storage. And then we've got the 2 new kids on the block. I'm saying that it's probably already about 2 years after these have become available. Geo-zone redundant, and then also with a read access option. Geo-zone redundant implies that the data is replicated across 3 availability zones and replicated to the regional pair. So it's like a combination of zone and geo-redundant storage. And then you'll notice we've got this read access option. And the read access option is predominantly used for the following scenario. If I replicate my data, from a geo-redundant storage, it's going to replicate the data into the regional pair. If the primary region goes down, the regional pair will fail over to the regional pair, and your data will be available from the regional pair. If we configure read access geo-redundant or read access geo-zone redundant storage, what we will do is we will permanently give you a read access copy in the regional pair. So whether the primary region is up or not, we will give you read access in the regional pair on a permanent basis. So that's probably the more expensive option in the bigger scheme of things. All right, so when I create my storage account, I get to select these options, and it's also something that I can go and change after the fact. So the bottom line is that we are essentially replicating your data between different devices, between different facilities, and between different regions. And that's why we can give you such high availability on your storage data. Now, It's about time for us to be talking about this now. And I must have clicked on the wrong button there. But this is what Rav mentioned earlier on, the ability for you to get 50% off your exam vouchers. You'll notice that you can actually you can scan that QR code. We're going to prompt you for for your details, your name typically, and we want you to punch in this number. That's going to prompt you for that number 17872 as the event ID. So if you're keen, you have to attend 5 out of the remaining 7 from last week of the sessions to be eligible for this. And that will give you a 50% off the exam if you attend all 5 of those sessions. We will essentially give you an exam discount voucher for that. All right, so scan that QR code, fill out the form, punch in the code 17872, and if you've done this 5 times during the length of these 10 Tuesdays, then you will get that 50% exam discount voucher. Which we hope as many of you get as possible. All right, so you'll notice that at this point in time, my storage account is created. Now, before I continue here, there's lots of different tools that we get to interact with a storage account, right? As you can see here, I'm using the portal at this point in time, and there's something called a storage browser here, which essentially shows me how I can interact, with my storage account. There's the blob containers, the file shares, queues, and tables. We'll get to each of those individually. But I've also got some client tools here. You'll notice that I've got a tool here called the Microsoft Storage Explorer. I'm just going to zoom in here. This is a client. This is a tool that actually runs on your desktop. It runs on Apple, Windows, as well as Linux environments. So it doesn't really matter what platform you're using. We can actually run this tool. And through the Storage Explorer, we can essentially access our storage accounts and copy data in there, copy blobs in there, move things around, etc., etc. So what I'd like to show you here is I'd like to show you how I can essentially connect to a storage account. And of course, I can use a subscription, and you'll notice it's prompting me here, what sort of environment do you want to connect to? Do you want to connect to a US government environment? Do you want to connect to Azure in China, for example, or just a standard Azure environment? If I click the next button, you'll notice that it actually prompts me to authenticate here. In my browser, I can authenticate. And if I go back to my Storage Explorer, then you'll notice that it's actually showing me, all my different subscriptions that I've got in that tenant. So I'm not gonna continue with that because I've already connected at this point in time, and that's why you'll see there's my subscriptions and all the different storage accounts that I've got inside of my tenant. There's a couple of them, but I'll go through that in a bit more detail. So in other words, I can be using Azure Active Directory to authenticate against the storage account, right? And we are making more and more services in the storage account available via Azure Active Directory, which means you are essentially using your corporate identity and credentials to access the content in the storage account. Alternatively, I can also connect to a storage account using a bunch of additional things. There you can see I've got a connection string, right? I've got a shared access signature or URL, or I've got an account name and a key. And this is typically what you will use if you were, for example, accessing the storage account programmatically, right? If you built a Azure function, or if you built a web application and you wanted to enumerate all the blobs in the storage account, these are the credentials that our API might require for you to access the storage account. And that's essentially why we refer to it as a storage account, because it's got its own set of credentials that you can essentially use to access the storage account, right? So you don't need to use Azure AD specifically for that. Now I'm going to show you where all these items are. And if I scroll down on my storage account, you'll see on the left-hand side, I've got a section called Access Keys. And you'll notice with Access Keys, there's my key and there's my connection string. you will notice that the connection string is based on a specific key. So if there's my connection string, and you'll see it makes use of the key. So we can actually build up the connection string if we know what the account name and we know what the key is, right? There's my account name at the top there. I want you to remember, if someone has the account name and the key to your storage account, they've essentially got full access to the account, which is why we've got a secondary key here, and which is why we've got the option to rotate these keys. So what you might find is, if one of the keys have been compromised, you might actually change your applications to use the secondary key, rotate key number 1, and then change your applications back to using key 1 again, and then rotate key number 2, right? So you want to rotate these periodically so that they are, if they were compromised, that you rotate them on a regular basis so as to render the old key, completely useless, so that your account is not compromised. So there you can see I've got an account, the key. I'm going to copy this key into my Storage Explorer here. So if I go for storage account and I go for name and key, then you'll see there's my account key. If I paste the account key does not contain my storage account name. So I still need my storage account name, which is 10T or 10, right? And there you can see I can type in that. And if I hit the next button, it'll essentially use the account name and the account key to connect to the storage account and allow me to interact with that storage account. So that's the one option, account name and key. The other option is to use a connection string. Now you'll see that we've actually got 2 connection strings here. We've got a connection string, either a key or a SAS connection string. And the one I've already shown you, right? There's my key connection string, and I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it in the URL at the top here. There you can see, right? Default endpoints protocol, HTTPS, account name, account key. There's the key, right? And if I zoom in towards the end a little bit, you'll see there's the end of the key, and you'll see that it says the endpoint suffix core.windows.net. So my connection string is essentially made up of the protocol, the name of the account, the key, and the endpoint suffix. That's why I say this is not something that we're generating. This is something that if you know the key, if you know the account name, you can build up this connection string yourself if you wanted to. So I can go back into my Storage Explorer. I can say, hey, I want to connect here. And then if I specify a connection string and I paste my connection string, I want you to notice that it's going to fill out the account name automatically here. So if I paste that, it automatically sort of realizes that this is 10T. I've already got one, which is why it's kind of renamed it here. All right, but the other option for SAS is slightly different. And if I scroll down here, you'll notice that we've got the section here called Shared Access Signature. And a shared access signature is a special type of signature that we are generating with the key, but where we can add some additional criteria in. As an example, I might specify exactly what I want this SAS to be accessing, the different permissions, etc., etc. And then I can actually go and give it a start and an expiry date, which means that this SAS that I'm creating right now will only be valid at this point in time for about a week, right? So it gives me a little bit more capability, and you'll notice I can even go and specify some IP addresses, which means this connection string or this URL from this SAS is only going to be valid if I'm making the call to the storage account from the IP address that I specify here. And I'm not going to specify anything now. I, again, just want to show you. And there you can see I'm selecting the key that I want to use. If I select key 1 and click on generate the SAS, there's my connection string. And if I go back to my Storage Explorer again, if I select connection string and I go and paste this in there, then you'll notice that, don't worry about that there. Let me rather remove all of that and paste it again. And you'll see that, there's essentially my connection string. Now, what I want you to notice here is I want you to notice that nowhere in this SAS connection string does it actually show my key. We are using the key to generate this signature. That's the signature there, right? And if I roll the key, the signature will be invalidated, right? So that SAS connection string and that specific token that you can see, there's the token towards the end there, is only valid while key 1 is still valid. So if I roll key 1, this SAS will not be working anymore. All right, and then there's also a blob SAS URL, and I can use a couple of additional options. There you can see, if I specify the account, you can see there's a shared access signature URL, and it might prompt me for that URL. Very similar type scenario, it gives me access to that account. But the minute I'm using one of these SAS options, right, that one or that one there, it implies that we can limit the amount of time that the URL, for example, is going to be available, or that that the connection string can actually work. Right, I'm going to close down the Storage Explorer here. In fact, let me leave it open because I do still want to churn a couple of demos for you from that. All right, so coming back to just by the way, there's again the code you want to scan. The event ID 17872. If you want, can attend 5 of the remaining sessions, 4 of the remaining sessions, I think, if you did last week, and that'll give you that discount. Just to touch on that again. So before I continue here with my demo, let's just quickly pause at this slide for a bit. If you've done any of our courses, you might actually notice that we've got very similar sort of slides in most of our courses when we talk about storage accounts. Storage accounts can be used for a multitude of things, right? We can use storage accounts for our virtual machine disks, right? We don't really allow that anymore. We want you to use something called managed disks, but then we are managing the account in the background. Up until about 1.5 years ago, the disks that you see here was actually only came up to there, and storage accounts came all the way across to there, because up until that point in time, you could still place your virtual machine disk, the VHD file, in a storage account. Right now, we want you to move away from using and managing your own storage accounts for virtual machines, and that implies that we will provision a storage account in the background for your virtual machine, and we will manage it, but we are essentially still using our storage account services and everything that is cool about our storage accounts, like, for example, hey, where is it there? And everything that you might have become used to, you can see the durability, encryption, replication, fault tolerance, load balancing, all of those good things you can still make use of. But it's just that if you're provisioning a disk for a virtual machine, then you don't have to manage the storage account. We will manage the storage account on your behalf. All right, so I'm not going to create a virtual machine either now. I would rather get into, the nitty-gritty here. So I'm going to start on the right-hand side here, okay, with queues. Now, I want you to remember that storage accounts are part of our infrastructure as a service components, meaning that storage accounts do not have compute capabilities. What exactly does that mean? It means that we are literally just storing data. So you can store data or retrieve data, nothing in between. So you can either store files like binary large objects or blobs or something like that, or you can be storing text or something, right? But the point is, there's no server-side compute here. This is not like a web server that has got, the ability to execute ASP.NET code or PHP code or something like that. It's not a compute capability. It's literally a store and retrieve type capability, irrespective of what you're actually storing. So one of the options that we can store is essentially is QData. Now, you might be asking, what on earth is QData? And I'm going to try to draw this out for you just for a second. Let me just hide that. So if I'm running an ERP application, right? So I've got something like a ERP system, ERP, which is a financial and accounting type system of sorts. So let's say I'm running something like SAP, just as an example, right? What I might have is I might have hundreds of point of sale applications. Point of sale applications are these applications that sit at the pay point in a commercial sort of, in a shop, for example, right? So as the customer comes by, I scan all the items in the basket, and we create a sale, and that creates a sales order transaction. And what we want is we want all these point of sale devices and applications to send the information to a centralized SAP system, right? To post a transaction into our backend system. So there's many ways of doing this, but one of the ways of doing this is creating something like an app server. So you might create an app server of sorts, like ASP.NET server, and you can get all these oaks to send these transactions directly to the application server. Now that can probably work, but the minute you start to scale this, you'll see that you are going to need some scale on the app server side, right? I'm not going to draw all of them out. So this can be a costly exercise, right? To scale out your application server, right? Because if I'm sending millions of transactions into the app server, it implies my app server needs to scale accordingly. And that cost is something that we don't like to see, because the cost can literally just go up and up and up. The more transactions we get, which is good for the organization, but the more we have to scale, right? So how do we get rid of this requirement where, we've got an application server that just scales all the time? So I'm going to run the undo a couple of times here, and I'm going to put a queue in between. I am not a Picasso, as you can probably see here, but this is essentially a queue, like the storage queue that I'm about to show you. And what I can do now is I can let my point of sale devices send their messages into the queue. The messages will lie in the queue, and they can stay there for up to 7 days. And then I can instruct my application server on a type of a timer type event to go and read, all the latest transactions in one bulk sort of, a read exercise. And that gives me the ability to do what is known as load leveling. So the pattern that we see here is a fan-in type pattern, where I've got multiple devices or services or point of sale applications that's sending the information to a centralized queue environment. And then I've got one application server that are reading these messages off the queue, either one by one or, in a batch type format. And that implies that I'm going to get much better performance out of my application server than all these, point of sale devices sending their messages straight to the application server, right? And that's typically what we use queues for. Now, the storage account queue is a very simple sort of queue. There's no enterprise capabilities in the queue. There's no dead letter queues and stuff like that. For that, you want to use something like the Azure Service Bus, for example, which can probably be more compared with MQ series from IBM and those sort of services, right? RabbitMQ, etc., etc. So the queue service, I'm going to quickly demonstrate this for you. If you just give me a second. So there is my my Storage Explorer again, and I'm going to go for training here, and I'm just going to refresh there, and I'm hoping that I can see that. Or did I put it? There we go. I put it under always on, right? There you can see there's my storage account tent. I apologize for the font size here, but there you can see there's something called queues, and I can go and right click there. I can create a queue if I wanted to, and I can call this queue sales orders, right? And there you can see I can add a message onto the queue. I'm demoing this from the Storage Explorer because it makes it quite simple for me to demo this. So there you can see, and now this is going to be my sales, order, and in whatever format. Right, and there's going to be, the individual lines and stuff like that, whatever is the message, and I can submit this. You'll notice that it will expire in 7 days. Now I've placed the message on the queue, and now I can programmatically go and read these messages off the queue once again. All right, so that's the one option is queues, and it's a great way for you to send messages between applications, so disconnecting applications so that they can, almost like in a publish subscribe type pattern, if you want to see it like that. The next option is tables. And I want you to think of tables very similar to NoSQL tables. And what we mean by NoSQL is not only SQL, and the good example of this is key value pair data. So if I have to create a table, I created a table here called website. And if I hit the add button, you'll notice it's prompting me here for a partition key. And the partition key I'm going to create is website 1, just as an example. And I'm going to say about us. And then I'm going to add some properties. Let's say our story, just as an example. Blah, blah, blah. We started in a garage type scenario, right? I'm going to say I have another field there called our founders. Joe Soap founded our company, and I'm going to hit the insert button. What am I doing here? I'm storing, as opposed to QData, I'm storing data in a table, and I can now programmatically go and read or write this information from my web application, just as an example. I'm going to add another option here, and I'm going to remove those two, and I'm going to say this is also website 1, but this is the contact us row, and then I'm going to say this is our telephone number, this is going to be 555, this is our sales email address, sales mall, don't worry about that, that is blah, 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 and let's use something old, fax number, right, 555. So what are tables? It is a NoSQL type environment where I might be storing just some data in a primary key type fashion, right? Key value pair type data, right? Very, very fast, very optimized. This is something that I can very easily, hook up to my web application, and my web application, as opposed to having a full-on database, my web application can go and read these values out very fast, very quick. It scales, etc. So for the last part of the and these are essentially these two here, queues and tables, right? So there you can see NoSQL store and queues for scale between cloud services. Let's quickly chat about files for a second. Now you'll notice here that files is SMB access. So some of you might be familiar with the file share. Typically, we've got file shares that we've got on premises where we've got massive file shares, and our users essentially log on the morning to their Windows devices, as an example, and we as IT go and map the T drive out to the sales folks' share, right? This is exactly what we can do with our storage account. I'm going to go back into my storage account here just to demo this. There's a file shares option, right? And you'll notice that I can click on new file share. I can give it a name, sales folks, right? Whoever those are. And there you can see there's my sales folks file share. And if I click on the connect button, if I was running something like Windows, then you'll notice that there is effectively the script that I can use to map a drive to this file share. Right, and there is.
Hi, Johan.
Yes.
Do you think you can make the text a little bit bigger?
I probably can a little bit, right?
Yes.
Is that better?
Thank you. Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So if I go back in here, I'm going to just paste that. I'm going to paste that script in there. I'm going to hit the enter button, and you'll see that if I go and go to my Z drive now, and just start it up, and you will see that my Z drive is actually now pointing to that file share. I apologize. The rest of my screen is not going to be as big, right? And there you can see there's some files. So I can now go and create a new Word document, for example, right? And I can go and save that. And if I go back to my account again, then if I hit the refresh button, there's my Word document. So there you can see if I click on connect, there's the command for mapping the drive on Windows. If I was running Linux, there's the command to essentially map a drive with Linux or mount that location. If I was using the Mac OS, there's the command that I will essentially use to map that remote location for SMB from a file share perspective. We've also got the capability here to do snapshots, right? So you can see I can go and add a snapshot. I'm just going to call it first and hit the OK button. And then I can go back to my overview again, and I can go and delete this file here. And you'll notice if I go back to my snapshots, I can actually go and restore this file if I wanted to. We've also got an agent that's available that will essentially help you to replicate your on-premises file shares into the Azure Storage Account file share, and that gives you almost a lift and shift migration type capability for file shares. So Azure Files, if I can just pop back in here again, Azure Files is SMB file shares that essentially allows you to take some of your file share requirements and move them into Azure, into a storage account. It's not ideal for desktop users. I can be quite frank about that. You might find it's not the best solution if I've got a bunch of users and the internet connectivity is not great. So think more of SMB file shares for virtual machines inside of Azure, for servers, for example, that need a remote location where it can drop some data, as an example. So that is the three options we spoke about so far, and this is essentially the elephant in the room here: blobs, right? What about just big files? And for blobs, we can essentially store three types of files, right? We can store block blobs, which are just big files, right? And you can see there up to 4.7 terabyte in size. We can also store what's known as append blobs, and append blobs are essentially log files. And then we've also got what's known as page blobs, and page blobs generally are virtual machine disks. So when you upload a blob into a storage account, we're essentially specifying this blob is a block blob, this blob is an append blob, this blob is a page blob, right? And you cannot change the blob after the fact. The key difference is page blobs are optimized for read and write operations. So sparse data where your virtual machine is copying data around on the disk the whole time, it's optimized for that. Append blobs can only grow. So I cannot create a new version of an append blob. I can only call an append operation on an append blob. And that means that I'm continuously adding to my log file, as an example. Whereas page blobs can be updated, and I can roll forward a new version of the file, for example, and I can go and restore an old version of the file. Think PDFs, any sort of static content for that matter. All right, so let me demonstrate some of that quickly. I've got about 10 minutes left. I think that's good enough for a demo. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go for my containers. Now, don't worry about the term container. A container is not the container applications that I've been talking about. A container in a storage account is more like a cloud volume, if you like, all right? So it's an area that I'm making available. And you'll notice here that I can go and specify whether it's going to be private. In other words, do I have to be authenticated for the storage account, yes or no? Or it's also blob anonymous, which means if I know the URL for the blob, I can just call it. Or it's going to be container anonymous, which implies that I can essentially enumerate the blobs and then call the blobs. I'm just going to go with blob anonymous here and hit the create button. Ooh, let's call it website, just because I'm running low on ideas here. So I'm going to call it website, right? And I'm going to click on website, and I'm going to upload some files here. Now, I'm quite fortunate in that on my desktop here somewhere, I've got an index file, and I've got an index file. And let me just quickly crack it open here. I'm going to, well, let me rather just upload them. And you'll see here, if I click on advanced, I can specify the blob type. These are block blobs. And I can even go and give it some index tags. I can specify the tier that I want it to be accessed, right? We've got different tiering options for storage accounts. I'll possibly see if I can demo some of that in a bit and talk a little bit through that. But I'm going to hit the upload button here now. Keep in mind that I made the access level, I made blob anonymous, all right? So there you can see I've uploaded my two blobs here. There's the HTML file. It's just a static HTML file, nothing fancy. There's index.html. If I copy that to my clipboard, you'll notice that I can actually crack open an in-private browser window here and paste that URL. And there you can see, there's my static web application, right? And if I zoom in here slightly, you will see that this is my storage account name, pint.blob.core.windows.net. This is the name of my container that I created, and that is the name of my file, right? So it is ideal for you to split up your web applications into the dynamic part of your web application that requires some server-side compute like ASP.NET PHP applications, store them in app services that we spoke about last week. But your static content like your images, your JavaScript files, your PDF files, your videos, all of that static content, don't store them in your app services that requires very expensive compute infrastructure. Store it in storage accounts, right? We can even go and map a domain name here so that your web application can be referencing your static content from here, for example, files.contoso.net or whatever that URL needs to be. All right, so and that is essentially how the blobs essentially work. You will notice if I select website and I change it to private access and I go for a new in private window again, then you'll notice that now it's not allowing me access to my content because it's not anonymous anymore, right? So now I need to be authenticated to get into the content. On top of that, if I can just scroll down here a section, there's one more demo for me to show to you, and this is lifecycle management, right? I can actually go and add rules that will tier, I'm just going to call this one default, that will tier my storage, my content down from hot tiers to cool tier, to archive tier, to eventually deleted. So I might say, if the blob has not been modified in 30 days, move it to cool storage, right? Cool storage is going to cost a little bit less to store the data, but it's going to be a little bit slower and a little bit more expensive for me to get the content out of cool storage. So if I can go and add another rule here if I wanted to, like for example, if it hasn't been modified in 90 days, move it to archive storage. And then I can add another condition. If it hasn't been modified in 365 days, then eventually delete the blob. So what am I doing here is I'm actually creating like a tiering schedule that will, over a period of time, that will move my blob from expensive storage that is quick to access. But as I access the blob less and less, we're automatically going to tier it down to a cheaper tier that is, that we can essentially pay less for us to be storing the content. All right, and I'll bump the font up again slightly so you can just sort of, see that bigger picture there. And you can see we can use metadata like last modified, the created date, etc., etc. There is a penalty that you'll pay if you are moving the content, for example, into archive storage and retrieving it within a certain period of time. Archive storage, by the way, is offline storage, right? So I cannot access the content if it's in archive storage. I have to first inflate it again by moving it from archive storage, changing it to cool tier or to the hot tier, and then I can access the content again. All right, and that is essentially that is essentially, storage accounts. I know that was quite quick, but just in summary, we spoke about storage accounts. We said that storage accounts are used for VM disks, right? Microsoft managed typically, so you will never see the storage account. We will manage it. But there's also some disaster recovery and high availability options where we can replicate your content to different locations. And then there are 3 different types of services inside of a storage account: queues, tables, files, and your blob storage, which essentially stores your static content for web applications. All right, that was quick. I hope I've at least given you a pretty good introduction. Let's see if there are any questions. Let me just find my browser.
Hi, Johan. There's no questions today.
All right, that's interesting. Okay.
Maybe we'll give them like a minute if anyone wants to add any questions.
Yeah, 100%. So it was a lot of information. I'm mindful of that. This usually takes me about 2 hours in one of my training courses to go through, and I've kind of rushed it now in about 50 minutes. So it was probably a lot to take in, but again, I've fielded some of your questions on LinkedIn. Some of you have reached out to me on LinkedIn and asked me some questions. So if you can't think of a question right now, you are more than welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And, I will answer the questions there as well, no worries. So let's give it another couple of minutes, I guess. So there's a question I asked about accounts versus user ID. I'm not 100% sure what you mean. So Harry, account is the storage account, right? A user is something completely different. But I understand why you're saying that, because we also refer to it as a user account, right? We have a very similar thing for lots of services inside of Azure: a storage account, a Cosmos DB account, right? So it is essentially a service that has got its own unique set of credentials, like a key or a connection string that you can use to access the content. Since Azure Storage can be used for HTML, JavaScript, and CSS file, is there a way to connect a domain name to a specific HTML file? Absolutely. I can probably show that to you. If I close this down, then you will see it is in here somewhere. Let me just quickly check. It might be under configuration somewhere. I cannot find it here now, but I know there is an option for it somewhere. I'm convinced about that. So there we go. There's custom domain. So yeah, absolutely. Fashion media, there's definitely a way to do that, and I can bring my own custom domain here. You will also see that if I wanted to enable things like cross-origin resource sharing, so if I wanted my web application to reference the content in here, I can do that through a CORS policy, and that's something I can also implement in here. No, Harry, a storage account does not tie to a user ID. It is 2 completely different concepts, right? You've got your username, which is also called an account, and then you've got a storage account, which is the service that we are talking about. I hope that answers that question.
So I have one more question. Since Azure Storage can be used for HTML, JS, and CSS files, is there a way to connect a domain name to a specific HTML?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've just answered that one. There you can see
sorry.
There's the custom domain option, and I can go and link a custom domain in there if I wanted to. Or something like content.contoso.net. And then you can see I can use the indirect CNAME. So if I hit the save button here, I first have to go and validate that. But anyway, absolutely, you can definitely do that. Okay, so I can go and I must first go and add it on my DNS name, and then it'll essentially be able to leverage it from here. So yeah, absolutely, that's possible. And that is actually the idea, is that all your static content gets moved into a storage account, and from there you are referencing it through a custom domain name, and so that is the plan. Alrighty, I am not sure if there are any further questions. If there were questions, if I missed out on a question, yeah. So Harry, I see that Harry is mentioning there that that we must remove the speaker video. I suspect that I'll have a chat with Rav to see if we can do that. Anyway, I hope that was helpful for everyone. I hope you learned a couple of things, and remember to go and to go and sign up for the exam discount. I hope you have a great evening, and remember, if you have any questions, please ping me on LinkedIn. Thank you very, very much.